Alright, welcome back to We Play Games. I'm Walker, and here we are continuing our campaign with Maharaja Dyre the Stranger of Tamilakam. And we've migrated all the way out to India, established ourselves as a powerful warlord, created a syncretic culture, Tamil Norse, executed an invasion of the Carnatic Kingdom, and we still have the strength to keep going, but at this point, Dyre, he's 62 years old, his health is poor. Fortunately, we have picked up Iron Constitution and Fine Panacea along the way, but he probably has epilepsy, or at least the way they would present epilepsy in the medieval world. Regardless of the cause, his health is poor, and it is important that he settle his succession. Now, anytime you are planning out a succession in Crusader Kings 3, you need to keep in mind what laws you have. The first and most important succession law here is whether or not you have some form of partition. At the beginning of the game, especially in 867, and, of course, tribal rulers are locked to the succession type, you're going to be in Confederate Partition. Under Confederate Partition, your titles will be divided equally between your children. New titles may be created for younger realm heirs. So what that means, in layman's terms, is that here we have a kingdom that we have conquered from our enemies. The kingdom of Telangana has held on in the north, but they've lost the overwhelming majority of their strength. They're down to 1,500 troops because we conquered all of Karnataka. But we conquered all of Karnataka, and now we haven't created the title, but our son is listed as the heir to the kingdom of Karnataka. And that's what Confederate Partition does. Confederate Partition means that if whatever rank you are, and there's a title that isn't created, you will be forced to create the title and give it away to your second sons. Now, that doesn't mean that you're necessarily, gonna lose control of all of your kingdom, because keep in mind that they are not going to be inheriting your men-at-arms. If you think that Frireker is going to allow Sunni to be a king for very long, then you're not paying attention. Confederate Partition can be hard to solve. If you do not have an enormous military that you can use to bully your brothers, then it can be very difficult to expand. Because every time you die, all of the equal titles will break away. And so if you are a very powerful duke, but can't make it to being a king, that's really the death trap. Because once you're a king, then you can be pretty powerful. But if you're a powerful duke who can't become a king, Confederate Partition, I guarantee you will blow your kingdom apart when you die. And that's sort of like what happened to the Rurikids throughout the 10th and 11th centuries historically, is that they kept founding these smaller kingdoms, and then Confederate Partition would blow it up. So the way to get out of Confederate Partition is to get into Partition, which requires the hereditary rule innovation. There are a handful of things that can get into primogeniture early, but most of those are titles that are by definition primogeniture. So most people will be looking to find hereditary rule in the early medieval age in order to solve partition. If you're playing in the 1066 start, obviously that's very different technologically. When you're playing in the 1066 start, you don't need to worry about Confederate Partition unless you're playing someone who is explicitly tribal. But the difference between Confederate Partition and regular partition is that it won't create new titles. And so if we were under regular partition here when we died, then our second son would get nothing. He would just be a fun duke hanging out, telling people how cool it was that he had to be loyal to his elder brother. And so finding your way into partition fast can be pretty good. Partition is that it will actually keep in mind territory that's already been given out. So from the realm's Confederate Partition, despite the fact that we have 6 territories, we're giving literally 0 of them to Sunni, because he has 4 counties already, and a duchy title. And so he's going to be skipped in a lot of rounds of succession here. Whereas our other son here, Thorbrander, he only has 1 duchy title and 2 county titles, and so when we die, he's gonna get a little bit of territory down here. But that means that all of the core territory that we want our eldest son to be able to inherit, he already stands to inherit. And that's partially because despite having 14 children, in our first 3 being sons, 2 of our sons died very young, one of whom had no children. The other son was murdered during our occupation of Crete. Looks like by the very man who we put in charge of Crete, and only left 2 daughters. And so Dyre's succession really is pretty straightforward. But we want to position our son Freyraker to do very well, because he's a content, high-learning character. Maybe beat up his brothers, and then do a bunch of raiding, and then do a bunch of building and technological development. And Dyre wants to set his son up well for that, but more than that, Dyre wants to set up grandson here, Skarphéthinn, to eventually become the Emperor of Tamilakam, or maybe even the entire Deccan Empire. In order to ensure a third son be allowed to succeed, you can go through and manually disinherit a lot of characters, or because these are our grandsons and not our son, we might murder them. But another easier, bloodless way to do it is if you have access to one of these elective titles. Scandinavian Elective here is going to only let vassals vote for extended family members or claimants. And so it can cause you to lose control of the kingdom title to a non-family member, but generally speaking, that'll be done through children born out of, out of a matrilineal line, or if you've recently conquered it, then claimants out there. And of course the extended family, which is cousins, uncles, aunts, nephews, and nieces. But an important thing for Scandinavian Elective is that it's also modified by the domain development and capital popular opinion, which I just think is pretty neat. So we're going to add the title Scandinavian Elective, and we are going to nominate Freyraker. And we're also going to add Scandinavian Elective to our main duchy title down here in Madurai, because that's going to allow Freyraker to ensure that Skarphéthinn is at least able to succeed as the Prince of Madurai no matter what. Other important things to keep in mind in regards to your succession is, of course, gender law. Male preference means, if you're not doing some sort of elective shenanigans, that if you only had daughters, then of course one of the daughters could succeed. But if you have, 3 daughters and then a son, the son is preferred. There's also male only, equal, female preference, female only, kind of exactly as you would expect. And of course we can do designated heir. If you have absolute crown authority and you don't have this elective stuff, then you can choose to designate your heir. There are other elective laws here, Saxon elective and Tanistry elective, for instance, as well as elective laws in the HRE. Most of these are going to be gated by specific traditions or technologies. I want to eventually get us to where we have Madurai, and then this territory over here, the Raj of Warangal, because Murigonda has a gold mine or a gem mine. And so if we can control that territory and our little capital down here, we should be able to have an enormous amount of money and a lot of military strength. So you might ask yourself, is there a good reason that you might want to stay in High Partition versus going down into Primogeniture, Ultimogeniture, or House Seniority? And you should be able to identify that just by checking through here. High Partition affords you a direct vassal opinion, which is a pretty big deal. High Crown Authority here, for instance, is a -10 direct vassal opinion. Also, you're going to have feudal contracts with a lot of your characters that might penalize them. And so just having a nice blanket opinion bonus is pretty useful. And of course, as long as you have ways to modify your inheritance, either via assassination or by using monks or by just disinheriting. But by establishing these Scandinavian elective laws here, we do now hand out votes to people in our country. Faith and heritage does modify the number of votes, so we could potentially convert our capital, but I don't actually intend on converting people to Asatru. I intend to convert to Hinduism and then create a new pseudo-Norse Hinduism here. It's also important to note that if we were trying to change into partition instead of Confederate Partition, we would actually not be able to in this case because we have a powerful vassal who opposes it. And so that's one case where you do need to be aware of either the opinion of the characters involved and trying to keep them happy, or keep them afraid of you. That's another easy way that we could control this character once she's an adult, is just make sure that we have a really high dread. We might launch a couple attacks here to take territory from these Hindu kingdoms here in the south. Because important to note, Confederate Partition will only create a new title if the title does not currently exist. If we're taking territory from kingdoms that are on the map, but just taking duchies at a time rather than the entire kingdom, then when Freyraker succeeds eventually, he will be even stronger. We'll also go over artifacts in this episode, considering that succession is a relatively quick and easy thing to understand. So you'll get these characters with inspirations. It's going to be indicated on their portrait with this little brush and pen, I think is what we're looking at. If they're in your court, even as a guest, you can still sponsor their inspiration. And depending on their skill and how much money you're able to feed to them throughout, they will create objects for you. Now, you can go through and sponsor every inspiration that you come across, but my general recommendation is that merely decent characters don't bother. But you can get different kinds of items. Some items you're going to be gaining specific artifacts in here for your inventory. So in this case, we found someone who wants to forge a crown, and it will be worn on the crown slot. And then it'll be inherited normally to whoever our player heir is. You can get court artifacts by just capturing territory, by just capturing them from people, but you can also get them from inspirations. Just kind of depends on what sort of inspirations are available to you. Here we have tons of money, and so we're looking for inspirations, and so we found somebody who is considered a legendary weaver, and we want to weave some stuff here in our royal court. So we have started a befriend scheme against Diadonar, and if we can get that done before her artifact gets done, then we will be able to recruit her and get that artifact completed for basically free. Unfortunately for the Hindu kingdoms down here in the Deccan, because we started sort of at the top and are devouring down, it's just going to get harder and harder for any of them to piece together the military resources to stop us. And we are going to go ahead and take Know Thyself, because Know Thyself is, I think... Oh, she's my friend, but we will sponsor a new inspiration here. This is, of course, going to be really profligate, but... we are profligate, so it's in character. We're gonna bring in lots of gold from the rest of India, and then we're gonna bring in friends and have them use their inspirations to make cool stuff for us. All right, and I'm gonna leave you one final note for succession here in Crusader Kings 3. If you have an old character and you really do need to worry about, succession for yourself, in this case we're not like super worried, but our eldest son and player heir Fricker here, he is a flagellant, so I just wanted to keep in mind if he died, that we would have time to reorganize our succession. But as long as you have the Know Thyself perk, which is just the level 3 here, straight down the middle of whole of body, then whenever you're within a year of being dead, you will get a little event. And just like that, Maharaja Dyre has indeed died. We played for almost exactly 51 years. Now our nephew has succeeded as the kid in control of Karnata. But that's how you can plan around your succession in Crusader Kings 3. It's very important. We will set a couple of things up here for Fricker. But importantly, now because we've attached Scandinavian succession, Scandinavian elective to so many of our titles, we can choose which of our sons succeeds us. And in this case, Rajkumar Scarfathan was the character that we were working with, and I think he is going to be a really good option. But our next couple of episodes, playing as Maharaja Fricker, are going to be dedicated to the things that he's going to be very good at. As a very high learning character, he's going to be really good at working through technology. And so we're going to do a lot of conversation in regards to teching up as a character like this, and in regards to how you spend your money and your gold. Because Fricker, he's a content character, so I'm not going to attack a lot of people. We are, of course, going to take back this kingdom, and then we'll probably take Mudagunda, and then the remainder of the reign for Fricker will be spent on internal development, because I want to set up Scarfathan with his martial education to just be an absolute monster, conquer a whole bunch of stuff, and then maybe he'll go the direction of Ashoka that Scarfathan converts to Hinduism, and then we will talk about that in turn. And that's our intro to CK3 episode on succession and artifact here on We Play Games. Take care.